as it's Tuesday. Today is an informational board briefing. In accordance with the declaration of emergency announced on March 11th and extended by the Board of County Commissioners on September 24th, today's meeting is being held virtually. And I want to thank everyone in advance for bearing with us through any technical difficulties that arise throughout our virtual meeting today. Please remember to mute your mic when you're not speaking. And when you're presenting, make sure that your mic is unmuted and your camera is on. I ask presenters to remember that the public may be listening via telephone, so please remember to state your name before responding to questions. Our first briefing this morning is on state budget reductions. Budget Director Christian Elkin, please take it away.
Good morning, Chair, Board. Christian Elkin, Budget Director for Multnomah County. I use she, her, hers pronouns. We are here today to kind of follow up on the state budget reductions for fiscal year 2021. As you know, the state typically does not enter into a budget process that aligns with our budget process. So usually we come back in the fall to review any impacts or fallout from the state budget. This year, the state held a one-day session on August 10th to implement those budget reductions. So we'd like to walk you through them. With me today is the impacted department, which includes Sheriff Mike Reese and guests. The Department of Community Justice is here to talk about their impacts, and County Human Services. We also have Justin Black from Government Relations to walk you through the session, and then to talk through what it's going to look like as we move into the next biennial session with the state. And Jeff Renfro is here, our economist, to talk a little bit about the latest forecast from the state. Thank you, Tasia. Can you go to the next slide? So our agenda today, I'm going to walk you through just a little bit about how direct state funds flow through the county's budget to give you a sense of the areas that it supports and what could be at risk or where our strength and our partnerships are. As I said, Justin will walk through the special session, and then each department will walk through the reductions that were given to us from the state, the service impact, and then if they have a mitigation strategy to try to minimize those impacts from the state, and then any ongoing risks or concerns as we head into the next biennium. Next slide. So what we wanted to do is just provide you kind of a general overview of how the state general funds flow through the county. And I want to be really clear about this. This is only the direct state funding. So this is anything that gets coded by the departments when they're entering their budgets. We also have a significant amount of money that comes from the federal government through the state government. Typically, you see that in like our Medicaid allocations and those types of things. But I think what's interesting to point out here is that Health and Human Services are really the largest recipients of that funding, with receiving almost over 62% of the state direct funding. Typically, these are just pure state general fund dollars. So when the state is looking at making reductions or additions, just like the county general fund, this is their largest area of flexibility. Next slide, please. Again, this is just another way of showing that state funding, that $105 million, but broken up into more the service area to highlight that Health and Human Services really are the bulk, with the health department being a huge majority of those funds. Next slide, please. What we tried to do here was then just kind of drill down a little bit in one level lower to show where the funds, what kind of program areas they support at the county, to give you a sense of where this funding is going. So we have about $40 million in funding for public safety. The district attorney's office receives roughly around $2.4 million. That's going to fund things like the multidisciplinary team and the child abuse unit. The neighborhood DA gets some support through the justice reinvestment dollars and their victim assistance programs. For the sheriff, you can see that almost the majority of the state funding that comes through, which is in SB 1145 funding, is going to fund detention beds at the Inverness jail. And then there is a small amount that we use for the East Multnomah County Gang Enforcement Team that the sheriff will touch on later. For community justice, again, the majority of the funds coming in from the state are through the SB 1145 allocation. And those are really funding adult parole and probation programs. These funds are fairly flexible in how DCJ uses them to provide those services. Their next biggest source is for alcohol and drug treatment and behavioral health treatment services at 3.5 million. And then they do receive a significant amount of money for juvenile justice at 4.4 million. And then finally, our local public safety coordinating council receives $1 million. This is between their SB 1145 allocation and their CJC, or the Criminal Justice Commission, House Bill 3194 funding. Next slide. Next slide, Tasia. Uh-oh. Oh, can we go one back? Thank you. As you can see, over 62% of the funding is going to health and human services, with the majority of that going to the health department. Of that, about $31 million is supporting behavioral health. So this is a pretty significant investment in an area that we would want to maintain those partnerships as critical services to our community. Another $15 million supports public health, and then about $2.4 million supports clinical services. In county human services, while the amount looks like 14.2 million, this is the area that I was talking about where they also receive a huge allocation, over $100 million of that fed through state allocation, and that's primarily the Medicaid services and those types of things. For county human services, you can see that their funded energy assistance and weatherization is 7.7 million, almost half of their state allocation. There's a large component that goes to housing stabilization and rent assistance, about 3.5 million. And then aging, disability, and veteran services receives over 2.6 million from the state direct allocation. The Joint Office of Homeless Services receives just under $3 million. That funding primarily goes for emergency shelter. And when you break that down, that's really supporting the family services shelter and the domestic violence intervention shelters. And then they use a portion of that funding for housing placement as well. If we can go to the next slide, Tasia. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Renfro to talk about the state forecast that happened on September 23rd, and just to give you some insight into the path that we're going to see moving into the next legislative session.
Thanks, Christian. So I'm Jeff Renfro from the Budget Office. I use he, him pronouns. So I'm just very briefly going to update you on where the state financial outlook sits. So the state economists made a fairly big upward change in the forecast for the current biennium. So basically what has happened is the way they put it is when the job losses started at the beginning of the pandemic, they were expecting apocalyptic economic conditions, and instead we're just left with very, very bad economic conditions. So in the current biennium, the way this chart works is the red line is where they expect it to be for general fund revenues in their March forecast. The dotted blue line at the bottom is the June 20 forecast update after they had incorporated the impacts of the pandemic. And then the solid blue line is the most recent update that Christian just mentioned from a couple of weeks ago. So for the current biennium, basically the state's revenues are largely driven by personal income tax. So because the employment picture has recovered quite a bit faster than a lot of people were expecting, they're collecting more personal income tax than they'd initially expected. It's being driven by a few things. In tax year 2019, so the pre-COVID period, They had higher than expected revenues, driven largely by high income households had a very good year in 2019. In the current year, the combination of the federal assistance for people who were out of work, that is taxable, so that ends up bumping up the state's revenues. And then also, as I said, the unemployment picture generally is still bad, but we're not at 20% or 25% unemployment like some people thought we would be. Looking forward to the next biennium, we're still in a tough spot. So what we'll be left with as we move forward into the out years is the portion of the job losses that are going to be permanent. So even though there's been pretty good news about the unemployment rate dropping and people who were temporarily unemployed coming back to the workforce faster than they thought, there's been this steady increase in permanent layoffs or people who thought they were temporarily unemployed being converted to permanently unemployed. So the adjustments that they made in the out years were significant, but doesn't get us back to where we expected to be for the pre-pandemic levels. So for the next biennium, the 21-23 biennium, relative to where they expected to be pre-pandemic, for general fund and video lottery considered together, they still expect a $2.4 billion shortfall for the biennium. So good news in the current biennium, which will generate some carry forward, which might give them some additional flexibility. But going forward, we're still kind of living with the reality of the recession, and it's going to take a while to fully get back to where we were before all of this happened.
Thank you, Jeff. I think it's an important point that you're raising, because what I'm hearing out in public is that the message that folks have taken from this forecast is that, because it's not as bad as they predicted earlier it was going to be. People think, it's not going to be very bad. And I think that's really a mistake to believe that, because it is still going to be bad next biennium. It's just not going to be as bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And this morning, the Fed chair is testifying before Congress, making precisely that point, trying to get the federal government to continue some of the federal assistance that has really helped us weather this up to this point. So there's still, I think it's unanimous amongst economists that there's still some pretty significant danger in the economy at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we, do we have any questions, or should we move on to the next slide?
I don't see any questions, so we'll have time for questions at the end too. So Jeff, don't go anywhere.
Sure.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome Justin Black, our Government Relations Director, to walk through kind of the August special session and then the expectations for the upcoming biennium.
Hi, Justin Black. I use he, him pronouns. Yeah, as Christian said, the legislature met on August 10th for their second special session of the interim, mainly focused on dealing with the June revenue forecast, which was that they were facing a $1.2 billion deficit for the 2021 biennium. So they did this in a number of ways. They did about $400 million in reductions. This basically hit just about every program in the state took some hit somewhere. They also used $440 million of one-time funds. These were a lot of sweeping of accounts that were carried over from last biennium. And then they took $400 million from the Education Stability Fund. And this was triggered by where the economy was and then a 3/5 vote. So it's a very hard pot of money to get to. All of that happened so that they were able to fill that $1.2 billion shortfall. And I will say they did a really good job of prioritizing programs that were for the most vulnerable in our community. So like OHP, the Oregon Health Plan, didn't see any cuts. We didn't see drastic cuts in other safety net services. So they were, I will say, judicious in where they took their cuts. Now, coming out of that special session, the governor did veto about $35 million in cuts. That was largely based on the fires that were happening across the state and to restore programs that would help recovery of those fires. She also vetoed a $100 million allocation the legislature had made to the emergency board to deal with any rise in caseload forecasts for DHS and OHA. If there are dramatic caseload increases either in the Oregon Health Plan or other DHS programs, the legislature will have to come back and try to deal with those because they no longer have this quote unquote buffer to deal with any of those changes. Now, when we're looking at next biennium, Jeff and the chair were right on there. Although they have because of the September forecast, they have about a $1.7 billion carryover in the current biennium. They're still expecting a 3% reduction overall in the state budget next biennium. And that's largely due to the fact that although the revenue forecast is better, it's not great, and there's still a slide there. Also, I will say that in the forecast, there are built in there an expectation that the federal government will do some sort of stimulus package. Now, we've all seen at the federal level, there's still no federal stimulus package. In fact, the Senate has gone home until October 19th. So we don't expect any activity at the federal level anytime soon on a stimulus package. So we are really in a state of uncertainty about the next biennium. But right now, we are expecting at least 3% reductions across the board in the state budget. And as was also pointed out, although there are a few that are doing really well, we do expect caseloads to rise dramatically for safety net services. As we've seen, some of the federal programs like the payroll protection program ended September 30th. A round of layoffs are happening right now. Those individuals are going to end up on unemployment. They're going to end up on the Oregon Health Plan, and they're going to end up in other safety net services. So I will say a lot of uncertainty for the next biennium, but it will be a budget reduction season. So we are working hard to make sure that programs that serve the most vulnerable are protected. And I'll stop there.
Justin?
Oh, sorry, Chair. So now we're going to have each department and the sheriff's office speak individually to the direct impacts from the state reductions and then walk through their mitigation plans and how they're going to implement these reductions. So I believe first up is Sheriff Reese. And if we could go to the next slide, please.
Chair Kafori, good morning, and commissioners, good morning. I'm Mike Reese. I'm the sheriff of Multnomah County, and I appreciate your time today to talk about the budget modification for the sheriff's office. As Christian said on August 10th, during this year's second special session, the state rebalanced the 2019-2021 biennial budget retroactive to July 1st, 2020. This rebalance included a reduction to the East Metro Gang Enforcement Team, or MGET, from the Oregon Youth Authority grant. On this task force, the Sheriff's Office has worked in partnership with the Multnomah County Department of Community Justice and the Gresham Police Department. For MCSO, this resulted in a full elimination of funds for the grant, equaling $544,714. which basically funded 3 deputy sheriffs within the law enforcement division that were assigned to the task force. These deputies that were there have been reassigned back to general duties, and we cut 3 FTE vacant deputy positions from our budget. Altogether, this means that our MGET funding has been completely cut. The Gresham Police Department, which also experienced a cut, is continuing their portion of the task force using their limited general fund revenues from the city until December 31st, 2020. And then after that, GPD will reevaluate their position. We're going to continue coordinating with our partners as any new resources or opportunities are developed. At this point in time, we're concerned about, of course, the budget gap that existed from July 1st until we were notified and were able to make strategic cuts to that program. So we have a gap of a couple months where we were funding those positions until we learned of the state reduction. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Reese.
So without any questions, if we could move to the next slide and invite Community Justice to speak to their reductions, which also have a relationship with the Sheriff's Office reductions.
Good morning, Chair Kafori and Board of County Commissioners. My name is Erica Pruitt, and I am the Director of the Department of Community Justice in Multnomah County. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Accompanying me today with the Community Justice Impacts is Dina Corso, our Juvenile Services Division Director. So, as Sheriff Reese referenced, there was an impact to the MGET program, and this is a pass-through contract with the City of Gresham, and the impact to them was a reduction of 3 officers and a sergeant from the Gresham Police Force. As Sheriff Reese referenced, the remaining staff will cover active cases as the capacity allows. And really, the loss of this money, which was $544,617, has had a really huge impact on the ability on the gang investigation unit, and they're not certain how this team will continue in the future. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dina to talk about some specific juvenile services.
Can we do the next slide? Thank you. Hi, I'm Dina Corso. I'm the Juvenile Services Division Director for the Department of Community Justice. The other area that was impacted by the state reductions to the Juvenile Services Division is $313,480 of our Youth Gang Intervention Funding, also known as Gang Transition Services, or GTS dollars. The bulk of this funding is used to fund FTE and our Resource Intervention Services to Empower, or RISE unit, which works directly with youth who are on probation and high risk and primarily gang impacted. So the reduction of $313,480 would have a net effect of reducing or eliminating 2.11 juvenile court counselors in that RISE unit. Obviously, those are caseloads that are very important to our division in terms of reducing recidivism, reducing violence in the community. And so we have proposed instead to eliminate 3 vacant positions that are not caseload carrying positions. One is a juvenile court counselor in the adjudication unit. One is a clerical unit coordinator position, and another is a juvenile counseling assistant that was newly added in this year's budget but was never filled. So that $313,480 is a 8.5% reduction to our overall GTS funding, or has the impact of a 17% reduction because of taking the full reduction in the second half of the biennium. Again, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dina. And thanks, Erica.
So if we can move on to our next slide, we have the Department of County Human Services, who has kind of the primary or the bulk of the reductions, and they have about 4 slides to go through. So if we can invite County Human Services to begin with the reductions to aging.
Hi, this is Mohammed Beir. Hi, Chair and Commissioners. Mohammed Beir, I use he, him, and I'm the Interim Director of County Human Services. And with me, I have Irma Jimenez, who is she is the Interim Director for Aging and Disability Services. And so she's going to go over the slides, and then here and I and Rob and Lee Gerard, if there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer those. So Irma.
This is Lee. I think that Irma may be having difficulties with her video and audio.
Well, I guess Lee, maybe, or Rob, whichever one of you want to take this.
I can go ahead and do this
Okay.
for folks. So,
Sure.
hello, everybody. I'm Lee Gerard. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the interim deputy director with DCHS. We're going to start with the largest reduction that ADVSD is going to be experiencing, which is a reduction of $1.7 million. And we are anticipating that there will be no service impact from this, largely because the division was planning originally last year. There was an increase in our caseload and an increase in staffing. And originally the division was planning to rent additional space using Medicaid funding. With the change to the pandemic and anticipated long-term impacts to the way we do our work, we're anticipating that we will not be renting new space, and which allowed for addition to free up some funding that we had put into our budget, in our administrative budget. That's a really positive impact in this case, because if we wouldn't have had that additional funding, we would potentially have had to reduce 17 positions within the Medicaid services program in both in several program offers, and those would have had directly impacted services to Medicaid clients. At this point, we don't see any service impact, and we all do also know, though, that the funding status for the next biennium is fairly uncertain. But these are ongoing savings that we will continue into the next biennium. Next slide, please. Okay, this next item is mental health services for older adults. This is state general fund, 100% state general fund, and we have services that we provide to older adults in 4 metro area counties. Multnomah County is the entity that oversees those services. It's an evidence-based mental health program that provides supports to older adults who are experiencing depression and anxiety. Because the funding is for a 4-county area, we won't be able to mitigate the impact to all 4 counties, but we are looking at being able to identify some one-time only funds for this year that will help us to continue this really important evidence-based mental health services for older adults within Multnomah County. We're anticipating that we'll be able to continue to serve 96 clients for this next year, and the 2 entities, the 2 community-based organizations that have been providing the service have said that they will be able to continue the service for us. Next slide, please. Okay, this next item, this is funding that the state allocated with state general funds for case management and transportation services. This funding was allocated a number of years ago when the federal government was making reductions to the Older Americans Act services. We anticipate that we will likely be able to come up with some one-time only funding that is carryover or savings that and some CARES Act funding that we have available for this fiscal year that will be able to continue these services for the rest of this fiscal year, but we have only identified funds for this year, and we anticipate that in the next biennium, these will be a permanent reduction. And let's go to the next item. Okay, this final item is funding that ADVSD gets from the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs. This is a reduction of approximately $27,000, and this is provides support to veterans' families, helping to connect them to a variety of VA benefits. We're anticipating the reduction of this funding will have a slight impact in FTE. We'll have to reduce 0.25 FTE, and it will actually impact a vacant position. So instead of filling it at 1.0 FTE, we'll be filling it at 0.75. We also have, this also includes $10,000 for a contract that we have with Pacific University to continue to do mental health evaluations, which really help to speed up the process for getting veterans into VA services. Our hope is that we'll be able to maintain the 10,000 for the mental health evaluations. And we anticipate that there may be some potential for longer wait times because of the reduced FTE, but we will be tracking that very closely and trying to take any measures to mitigate that. Again, this is one time only that we'll be mitigating for the mental health evaluations. The rest of it will be a reduction. And let's see, I think that those are the items for our ADBSD. In case there are any questions.
Thanks, Lee.
So that's the end of the department presentations for the specific impacts to services in the county. We can go to the next slide. I just provided a summary list here of the reductions by department so that you can see them in one place. As you can see, it's about $3.6 million. However, you know, a majority of those are being mitigated or offset with one-time only funds for the current fiscal year, but then will have to be reevaluated as we head into the next biennium. If we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to walk through the next steps for these state reductions. On Thursday, each department will be bringing a department-specific BudMod to adjust their budget for fiscal year 2021 and to realign with the state reductions. As you heard from our economist and from government relations, we will continue to navigate the state budget and try to anticipate as quickly as possible and evaluate the impacts from the potential state reductions. And then we'll work with government relations to ensure that they have the information they need so that they can really advocate for the county services in the next biennium. And that's the end of our presentation today.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian, for putting this together, and thank everyone who weighed in this morning. We will go through the commissioners and see who has questions. So if everyone would please stay on the line from the different departments, because I'm sure their folks have some questions for you. We'll start with Commissioner Myron.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christian, for putting us all together. I have one sort of broad question and then a couple of specific questions for the people who presented. And I guess the overarching question or just feeling, I guess, is we talk a lot about the services that are being cut or these programs, but I don't really have an idea of what the impact is on like actual people or outcomes or numbers or what these actually mean and translating into the real impact to the people that we serve. And so I would ask, for example, you know, the sheriff and Erica and Dina, for some of the gang programs, for example, I don't know how long those have been in place, how many people they serve. Like, does this mean that they're going to be? I don't know what these actually mean. Is there a way to sort of translate this into what that will look like on the ground? Is there going to be a tremendous increase in gang activity? How many
potential gang members or youth are being served right now? Have the programs been in existence for, decades, and suddenly we're going to see some difference? I just want to better understand some of the real implications.
Chair Kafori, this is Sheriff Mike Reese. I'm happy to start with an answer to that question, if that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Commissioner Myron, I think the grant, the pass-through funds that the county and the City of Gresham have been receiving specific to the East Metro Gang Enforcement Team have been ongoing for many, many years, and has allowed the Sheriff's Office, DCJ, and the Gresham Police Department to put resources towards community relationships with families and young people that are at risk of gang involvement, particularly where there's that intersection with gun violence. This will harm those efforts and reduce the number of positive contacts that our deputy sheriffs and Gresham police officers and DCJ partners are having with those folks that are at risk of being a victim of gun violence, or potentially taking a gun out of the mix to lessen the likelihood of a loss of life. The gang enforcement team has thousands of positive contacts every year. Most of those do not result in an arrest. They're highly proactive in meeting with families and young people at risk. And without those resources, it'll fall upon the responsibility of just patrol deputies and patrol officers for the City of Gresham. We've seen a shift in gang violence from traditional neighborhoods in North and Northeast Portland to East County, and the number of shootings happening in East Portland, as well as in Rockwood and our communities like Fairview, has increased dramatically over the years. And that shift is why the state put resources towards having a proactive response to it.
Okay, that is really helpful. Thank you. And and
Do you want Dina to answer? Did you want Dina to weigh in on the juvenile cuts? Because that was the
I
other.
assume it's a somewhat similar kind of thing, but Dina, I would love to hear it.
Sure, and specific to MGET, those dollars do pass through JSD from OYA, Oregon Youth Authority, but are not specifically just used to address youth gang violence. Both, the sheriff and Gresham PD, the metrics for those are much broader than just youth violence. The gang transition services dollars, that the 313,000 reduction, is directly impacting services to youth in the juvenile justice system, which is why we are proposing that instead of eliminating the direct service workers, the juvenile court counselors who work directly with those high-risk gang-impacted youth and their families, that we would make the reductions in some current vacant positions that we have, where we believe we can absorb the work without impacting the direct service delivery to youth and families the way we would if we had to take it where the funding is actually allocated.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Myron, this is Erica Pruitt.
Yeah.
I also wanted to just point out that what we know is that we are at historic levels of gun violence in our community. And I think one of the impacts that we see from a DCJ perspective, even though these are pass-through dollars, is that really vital coordination and ability to communicate so that we can work with our law enforcement partners to interrupt the violence that's in our community. So if you were going to be talking about an indirect impact to us as DCJ, that would be one of them that I think is really important to point out.
Okay, thank you. And that has been very helpful. And I do have a question also for ABVSD, there was a description of that $1.74-ish million that was planned to Medicaid funding that was being planned to be used to rent space. I was just curious about that. I didn't realize that we could use Medicaid funding for rent, like how the Medicaid funding for renting space. I'm happy to have some of these conversations offline. I was just a little bit confused.
Why don't Mohammed, instead of getting into detail on this question, why don't we Commissioner Myron, why don't you have your staff reach out to each of the department heads here and have some further, more in-depth conversation, because we have 2 more briefings after this to move on to. And did you have any other questions, or can we set those up offline?
No, that would be absolutely fine. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks so much.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Commissioner Jayapal?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, which I think has already been answered. I want to clarify, Dina. My question was, I'm really appreciative of the fact that you found a way to reallocate dollars so that we can continue that immediate gang intervention work with youth. I think what I heard you say was that the 3 unfilled positions that you used to fund, to fill that gap, don't have a direct service impact. Was that correct?
Correct. They're all 3 vacant right now, one due to a promotion, another due to a retirement, and the third due to us just never filling the position. It was a new position. So we had hoped to be able to enhance our services with additional direct service positions, but basically it just keeps us at status quo.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then just a comment in response to, what Jeff, what you said about, and the chair, about the fact that this isn't catastrophic as expected, but still really, really bad. And I think the other piece that folks out there don't completely understand is that it's also longer term than they think it is. I think there's a perception that once there's a vaccine, so maybe that corresponds to, the next biennium, the effect goes away. And what we saw on your chart was that it continues out for several biennia. And that's a really important factor as well. Thank you all very much for this. This was really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Jayapal. That's an important point. We won't be out of the woods for a while.
Yeah.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Thank you, Chair. And I just appreciate all this information, and and just really want to give my appreciation for all the work that's gone into figuring out how we're dealing with these state cuts. And it's been great to see that, like, by using some vacant positions, or even looking at things like the not having the need for so much space to rent because nobody's working in the offices right now, or very few people are working in offices right now, we're able to mitigate some of these impacts. I do hope that we're working with our government relations team, in preparation for the upcoming legislative session, is really looking at how some of the things, because this was both cuts because of the impact on the budget because of COVID, but also really trying to use dollars effectively and not fund things that may have disparate racial impacts. And I think with the with some of the DCJ programs, especially with the transition dollars for people who are impacted by gang activity, that's one of those where I think it's a really great program, and may have gotten wrapped up into some of the broader work that was happening, and hope that we can really make the case of why these dollars are really necessary to be making investments in community in positive ways, and have those have that those kind of programs be prioritized, I think, in the next legislative session. So I appreciate this, and I also it is definitely the picture isn't as bad as it was, and it's also, I just have to say, the way that this economic impact is hitting our budget in the long term, but also how it's impacting populations where folks who were not doing as well even before the recession hit are being hit even harder by this recession, and the need that places on our services and the demands of our different programs and things, that's something that I think also needs to be mentioned, because we're going to see an increase in those services and programs, the need for those, even as the money that's available is going to be less than what we previously had. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Sheriff Reese, I did have a question on the MGET funding. What kind of impact will that have to the 3 cities that we contract services with?
The operational impact is that there'll be less patrol response and proactive work done around gang violence in those communities. So we were able to leverage resources through the MGET grant with Gresham and MCSO jointly going to areas where there were shots fired, collecting data and evidence at those scenes. And while that will still continue, it won't be as, frankly, as effective as it was, where maybe why a certain address has been targeted and who may live in the area that may be a victim or a target of gang violence. And so you can do some outreach to that person. That kind of institutional knowledge about the families at risk and the connection to resources will all be probably less effective in the future, and that will definitely impact our contract cities.
Thank you. I appreciate you highlighting that. I did have another question too. I don't know, Christian, if this is for you, but when we look at the budget and we are analyzing vacant positions, I'm pleased to see that there's been mitigation strategies, but I'm wondering, do we have a running total by division, department of how many vacant positions? Essentially, is there money that we're kind of having a placeholder with? So I don't know if there's some type of tracking of that.
Hi, Commissioner Stegman. That's a great question. Typically, when we do the budget presentations, we ask the departments to look at kind of a vacant position list. The hard part about anything when you're talking about people and hiring is that list can change daily, depending on if people are retiring and if we're getting new funding or grant funding or what that looks like. And so it's not something that we're tracking kind of on a daily or a monthly level at this point. And it's really up to the departments to evaluate the need and the needs of the services and then determine which positions they're going to fill and how quickly they're going to fill them. So it's not a monthly reporting or anything like that. That's happening right now.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad that we have that flexibility, but it also kind of leads me to wonder if there's money potentially that's kind of being set aside. But we can talk a little bit more offline. So that's all the questions. Thank you so much. This is absolutely critical information for us to have, and I appreciate all the mitigation strategies. I think that they've been thoughtful, and it seems like it's the best course of action at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you all. We will now move on to our next informational board briefing, and it is on a light touch to the 2020 counter response to the fire and smoke event. And I think Chris Voss is going to be driving this one.
Actually, Dave is going to lead this one, but I will be here for questions. So I just want to thank the team and remind them we're running a little late. So if you could move kind of quick, I know the commissioners would appreciate that to have time with the questions. Thank you. Dave, all yours.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Thank you to Chair and the board for letting us come on and give a quick overview of our response to the smoke and wildfire event that happened last month. My name is David Lenzner. I work in County Emergency Management. I use he, him pronouns. We'll have 5 speakers to go over some different dimensions of the response that the county had to this event. I'll start and talk a little bit about how we redirected our Emergency Operations Center to respond. We'll have Katie Chickadons from the Joint Office of Homeless Services to talk about our sheltering response, Emily Barrett from Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services to talk about our call center response, Andrea Hamburg from Environmental Health Services to talk about our air quality response, and Aaron Drabant from the Department of County Assets to talk about our facilities response. Next slide, please. So I have been working here at the Gladys McCoy building as part of our COVID response since pretty much the beginning. So a long time ago, I've been one of the leads of our planning section here. And as these fires broke out, and particularly in Clackamas County, we got a request to have somebody come and assist at their emergency operations center. And so a couple hours later, I was down in Oregon City and able to assist with them down there. What the fires and the smoke event required was a lot of redirection of people's efforts because it was obviously a very significant event. And really there were two kind of main thrusts that the county had in response. One of those was internally in the county where we were going through, of course, as you all know, a horrible smoke event and also a really big need for information throughout the county for people who were very scared about what was happening. And then we were also able to assist Clackamas County in their response at their request. And again, the Riverside Fire and the Beachy Creek Fire, these were really massive events. And so we were very glad we were able to assist Clackamas County and that in emergency management. That just sort of relying on our neighbors to help in times of need is just really something that has to be done. And again, we were glad that we were able to participate and help them out. And so this presentation will touch kind of on both of those elements, ways in which we were able to assist Clackamas County, as well as how we directed our own response within Multnomah County. Next slide, please. So it is a challenge to respond to multiple events at once. And I think you'll hear from some of the speakers about the challenges of trying to respond to a smoke and fire event while also dealing with COVID. I think one of the advantages that we had was that we already had an emergency operations center stood up. And so we were able to reposition a lot of the resources that we already have and have really become very experienced in emergency management. And I think that helped us be able to respond to this event. So I wanted to touch on a few of those from how our county response to COVID, how we were able to sort of turn that and assist on the fire response. So one of those was hosting a joint information center or established by Portland Fire and Rescue. Because of COVID, they needed someone else to host this JIC. And so the county was able to do that through our county communications and our EOC public information office. They were able to coordinate with a number of agencies throughout Multnomah County, as well as into neighboring counties to ensure that there was a coordinated communications response. Let's see, there was a dedicated web page about the fire and smoke event. Some of the analytics that we saw was that that page got 5 times as much traffic as the normal Multnomah County web pages. And they added 8,500 new Twitter followers. So there was definitely a lot of interest that people had in following what was happening. Through our existing PIO COVID response, where a lot of translation work has been done, they were able to almost immediately turn around county communications and get it translated into Spanish just as soon as it was approved to go out. So it was a total effort there among our communications staff. We partnered with the Red Cross to shelter wildfire evacuees. This was at the Oregon Convention Center, one of 3 shelters that operated during the event. I believe that the largest headcount they got out to about was maybe around 100 people who had come from Clackamas County to evacuate. This was the only evacuation site being used with beds. There were evacuation sites in Clackamas County, but they were largely for people with vehicles, mostly with RVs. And our logistics team, which has been working on COVID as well as other responses for many months, were able to help support the Red Cross getting the OCC set up for that evacuation segment. We have a liaison team in our Emergency Operations Center, and they have spent many months building up contacts so that information can be gathered from different sectors of the economy and of our community to help us sort of identify what we need to do in our COVID response. And they were able to turn that back the other direction during the fire and smoke event to activate those contacts, 10,000, to identify what potential community services could be stood up to assist with the response. So some of that was identifying places where people could park or sort of ad hoc sheltering sites if people needed a place to go. There were sort of emergent donation sites that were popping up, and they were able to help identify those, and then did a big lift in animal evacuations providing Clackamas County with a number of sites where people could send livestock and pets. And then finally, we had a few people, including myself, go down to Clackamas County to serve in their emergency operations center. That was largely just to coordinate with what they need and to make sure that our communications offices were talking to each other. Other things that we were able to accomplish when we were down there, one was to connect them with the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and have Portland Neighborhood Emergency Team members go and help staff Clackamas Town Center, which was one of the big evacuation sites that sort of popped up in Clackamas County. And we were also able to provide them with a lot of the documents and the lessons that Multnomah County took from the Eagle Creek fire in 2017, particularly around how to manage reentry as the evacuation sites or the evacuation zones begin to shrink and change in Clackamas County as they got a handle on the fire. So we're going to go through, we'll hand off the presentation person by person, and then we'll have a question slide at the end. So I will hand it off to Katie Chickadons from the Joint Office of Homeless Services.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Chickadons. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a program manager with the Joint Office of Homeless Services, overseeing the department for the COVID-19 mass sheltering response. During the pandemic, I've been working in the Multnomah County Emergency Operations Center as the ESF 6 mass camp sheltering co-lead. So if we could see that next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So as Dave mentioned, during the severe weather smoke event, the Joint Office, in partnership with Multnomah County Emergency Management, was able to open 2 severe weather smoke shelters, one in the Oregon Convention Center. Now, this was separate from the Red Cross fire evacuee shelter that Dave mentioned, and also separate from the existing Oregon Convention Center physical distancing shelter, which has been in operation since March, I believe, earlier this year anyway. And the other severe weather smoke shelter was set up at the Charles Jordan Community Center. So that had previously been a physical distancing shelter, and we were able to set it back up fairly quickly. So within a day, we were able to help set up 2 shelters. Within 48 hours, we'd set up 4 shelters. So it was a huge lift by so many folks. We're super grateful for all that help. And we were able to add and maintain a capacity of 200 beds for the duration of the smoke event. During that and during that time, those beds were 24/7. So typically in severe weather, beds are night only, but because the risk did not decrease during the day, we were able to be open 24/7, and we haven't done anything like that before. So there were a lot of lessons learned, and it was a really big effort. So we were able to provide day space for folks to get respite from the toxic air outside, and come in and get water and snacks and things like that. During the event, we were able to distribute over 80,000 KN95 masks and water, many other supplies, including snacks. We worked with 27 outreach providers, volunteer groups, and mutual aid groups to help distribute these masks to unhoused and unsheltered folks. We also worked with public health to create an enhanced wellness screening that was distributed to all homeless service providers in the Multnomah County area, and I believe also to folks that we're working with in Clackamas. And those questions were because we were not only experiencing a wildfire, we were also experiencing COVID-19, and on top of that, it is starting to be the time of year where a lot of people develop GI issues. And so we're starting to see some gastrointestinal distress symptoms in our shelters, and being really careful to look at all of these overlapping symptomology issues, the smoke inhalation, COVID, GI stuff, and try to get folks referred appropriately while minimizing the possibility of contagion. So we were able to create those enhanced health screening questions and refer people as appropriate to our voluntary isolation motel shelter programs, so that they could isolate and get time to rest and recuperate. And that's, in a tiny little nutshell, what we got to do during this event. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Emily to talk about the call center. Thanks.
Thank you. Morning, Emily.
Good morning. Next slide, please. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Emily Barrett, and I am the Community Resource Program Manager for ADVSD, and currently also managing the Emergency Operations COVID Call Center. So talking today about our partnership with the Clackamas County wildfires. So it was a Friday afternoon at 4:30, and I was asked that if we could help provide support and relief to the 911 Clackamas County Call Center and the Clackamas County Emergency Operations Center by answering their telephone lines. And they requested that we could go live at 7 p.m. So immediately we were able to work within Multnomah County departments to ramp up the call center real quick. So we worked with telecoms and telecommunications to change the phone programming. And so we could take calls from Clackamas County into our center. We worked very closely with the Public Information Office team with Multnomah County and Clackamas County. So to launch a call center, the most important thing we need is information. And so we worked very closely with the communication team to create a script. And within that script, we were able to enter information, questions, communicate back and forth of when we needed more detailed information specific to evacuation routes, services, different things like that. By 7 p.m., we started with a script of 3 pages that got us through the night. And by the end of the week, our script page was 27 pages with a lot of information. So a really big, strong partnership, and props to the communication team. And without that partnership, the information delivery call center could not exist, right? So the topics ranged from evacuation routes to where is the fire, has my house burned down, transportation of livestock. Also, with every person who called, we reminded them to sign up for public alerts. We also signed them up. If they could not sign up themselves, we would sign up individuals for public alerts so they could get immediate response if they needed to evacuate in the moment. Then the calls over the week kind of shifted to donations, volunteering, and reentry. And there were so many calls about donation, and just the power of the community trying to step in to support people was pretty impressive to watch. And also powerful for the call center to be part of that project. So it was a really strong moment for our team to work on this. Next slide, please. So here's a little graph of the call center. So this is from the 7th of September to the 21st of September. And in this time frame, we took almost 1,500 calls. And during the time of helping Clackamas County taking wildfire calls, we were still taking testing and screening calls from Multnomah County. So you can see we had over 800 calls for testing and screening calls and 450 calls from Clackamas County for wildfire information. You can really see the surge on the weekend that we launched services, and then call volume really died down. But we were happy to assist for that long weekend to provide support for Clackamas County. So next up, I will hand the mic to Andrea Hamburg.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning, Andrea.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you, Emily. I'm Andrea Hamburg, she, her. I'm the interim director for environmental health services in the health department. And I want to first give a big shout out to Brendan Haggerty, Nadej Dubuisson, Mike Christian, and Jeff Martin for their excellent work before and during this event. The team put a lot of effort into preparing for an event like this, including taking steps in the spring to plan for the potential of a combined hazard of wildfire smoke and COVID-19. We conducted research to update public health guidance and worked with the Office of Emergency Management to adapt our wildfire smoke event standard operating procedure for COVID operations. And we developed guidance for creating and using box fan filters and translated it into 9 languages and worked with the Office of Sustainability, the Future Generations Collaborative, and the Department of County Human Services to distribute 200 sets of fans and filters. We did that because we were afraid that we might see something like this. And this was the worst air quality since the Department of Environmental Quality began monitoring in 1985. With particulate pollution concentrations 7 times higher than the previous record, which was set during the 2017 Eagle Creek fire. This event included, sorry?
Next slide.
Oh yeah, thank you. Next slide. This event included 11 days, exceeding the threshold for good air quality, 7 of which were considered hazardous by the US EPA. And someday we'll get to that slide. The actions of environmental health staff during this event fell into 4 categories: maintaining situational awareness, providing decision support, providing public health guidance, and planning for future events. For situational awareness, staff monitored air pollution levels, fire activity, meteorological conditions, indoor air quality, and health outcomes related to smoke. Staff investigated and monitored potential outbreaks of infectious and communicable diseases at shelter sites. And environmental health coordinated with other organizations on all of this work, including the Office of Sustainability, the National Weather Service, the Department of Environmental Quality, and Oregon Health Authority. Through surveillance activities like this, we learned that emergency department visits for asthma-like symptoms nearly doubled on days with the worst smoke, and verified that indoor air quality was better than outdoor air quality at sites around the county. For decision support, we interpreted air pollution data, characterized health risks, and alerted leadership of major issues. That included monitoring indoor air quality and advising the Department of Community Assets and other county departments on managing indoor airflows and prioritizing filtration resources. For public health guidance, we worked with county communications staff to develop and disseminate guidance to the general public and identified specific audiences. We conducted media interviews, did web stories, and revamped our county website with information. That information included basic communication like limiting or stopping outdoor activity, keeping doors and windows closed, creating a clean air room in your home, and recognizing the health risks of hazardous air. Staff contributed guidance to our call center. Thank you so much for all those calls. And provided on-site training at the Oregon Convention Center on updated cleaning requirements to reduce the spread of COVID and other infectious diseases, and spoke with the building engineer about strategies for improving indoor air quality for the folks staying and working at the shelters there. We worked with our partners to distribute the last 60 box fan and filter sets to community partners and county facilities, including a cleaner air shelter. We developed just-in-time guidance on reopening, sheltering, and transit operations. For the future, we want to note that there were some things that kept smoke exposure low this year. Heavy rains came quickly. Schools were not in session in person, protecting students from potentially poor air quality at our local schools, and evacuations did not extend into Multnomah County. We are already working with our partners in other departments and other agencies to integrate the lessons learned from this event into future event preparations, since unfortunately climate science tells us these events will become more common. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Erin in the Department of County Assets.
Good morning, Erin.
I go by he, him. I am from DCA and specifically from the HVAC engineers group. I'm the lead engineer for them. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview here of our point of view on what we did during the fire smoke events. So going off of this first slide here, we started off on September 10th with making the decision to go through and close all of the outside air dampers. This was for the purpose of stopping the introduction of the outside air in order to recirculate and filter the already existing air within these buildings. Additionally, we provided some negative air machines and air scrubbers to our fullest capacity to try to do our best to mitigate the effects that the smoke had on everybody, and to try to effectively curtail to the needs of the occupants of the buildings. And we have so many buildings to attend to. We decided to prioritize them into 4 different categories, the highest priority being the correctional facilities, where we dispatched personnel to those locations to close off the outside air. And then the next priority was the key operation buildings, such as our healthcare facilities. Priority 3 was the libraries, and then the last priority was the general administration buildings. Fortunately, 18 of these 35 buildings we were able to control remotely, which saved us a ton of time and allowed us to have a quick response to those locations, specific with their dampers and changing the way that their airflow is moving through their buildings, and maximizing the exhaust. We're able to do that using our building automation system, which is just a huge blessing for us to be able to use with the limited personnel. And then the 17 buildings we needed to respond to in person, in which most of the time requires us to get up on the rooftops and to go through and manually close these outside air dampers. Some of these buildings have up to 20 or more individual HVAC units, and so it's really quite involved to do so. And there's quite a few steps that need to be taken in order to effectively do that. And in doing so, we only had about between 6 to 8 people that were available to assist with this specific event, as the rest of our crew needed to continue on with the daily demands of our job, which don't stop during these events. And we kept these dampers closed through the entirety of the fire event until, I guess it was September 18th that it was the air quality index improved enough to where we reached a moderate level. And we received approval from Tracy Massey and Mike Strock to go forward with opening back up these dampers. And that was all, done with the consideration given to the engineers and their own personal safety, because not wanting to send them out into the smoke and up on the roofs for multiple days while many others were told to stay home because of the harmful possibilities, specifically to the respiratory systems. And so timing was a big deal. And so fortunately, the 18th, things cleared up enough. And actually with the same 6 to 8 people, we were able to address all of the outside air dampers with getting them reopened, which was a huge deal, and a huge accomplishment for this group to be able to do in one day. That was a lot of work. And as mentioned earlier, this really came at a unique time with COVID-19, and it forced us to really do a 180 from what we were doing prior. Before the smoke event happened, we were maximizing the amount of airflow coming into each building to try to dilute the spaces and try to keep the virus at a minimum from spreading, and all while still trying to maintain a somewhat of a comfortable climate. And of course, the smoke came, and we had to change gears there. But in both instances, it was imperative that we act quickly, both with closing off from stopping the smoke from entering and with introducing the fresh, clean air once it returned, to try to minimize the length of harmful exposure. Next slide, please. Let's see, sometime we'll get to this next slide, showing on both on the September 17th and 18th, we made a huge push to go and change the filters at our highest priority facilities, which again were the correctional facilities. And there was a little over 650 filters that were changed. And that was just an enormous amount of filters to do in a short amount of time. So that was a great thing. And everybody was eager to do it because, you know, honestly, people do enjoy serving and providing the service to people, you know, and the next step after we had the clean air coming in was to get rid of the filters that were holding on to the particulates from the smoke. And just I'd point out in this picture that's shown here, it does show how we do in many of our buildings, particularly at the Justice Center, Multnomah Building, and several others. We have two layers of filters. We have the polluted filters, which are, you kind of tell, are sort of a blue color there, and they have a white frame around them. And those are given a MERV rating of anywhere between 8 and 13. And then in this particular instance here, we have the bag filters, which are our secondary filtration system, which we usually go with a MERV 13. So it's an additional media there to catch more particulates and clean the air more. And then on through September 21st through the 30th, we were able to go through and change an additional 1,200 filters at our 28 buildings to provide that new filtration throughout the county. So, and that's a basic overview of what it was like from our end. Fortunately, you know, there was lightning going on around the area and it didn't enter the valley. That was a huge plus for us. That would have delayed us from being able to go out and change these filters. So huge blessing there. You know, among many other things. So I'll go ahead and turn back the time to you and to whatever questions that you have.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So the next slide just has questions. So we're happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to start with Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. This has been so great to hear from you all on the front lines of, you know, the fires and COVID. I'll start with Aaron. Like, wow, that's amazing. The work that you've done with such a small staff. I guess my question would be, and you talked a little bit about it, like how, like you had to shift from COVID to, I don't know, increasing the air, you know, airflow, to like completely reversing course, and just like wanted to know like what were the changes that you made? Where was it just the, you know, which was a lot, changing the filters and then closing the dampers?
Yeah, the biggest difference that we did was just going from having the dampers completely open, bringing in as much outside air as possible, to then closing off the dampers, trying to prevent any outside air from coming in. And we were worried too, because we're like, well, what is this going to do to the risk factor of contracting this, you know, virus? And so we were really relying on risk management, giving us direction on, you know, which one is more critical at that point in time. So.
Yeah, obviously timing was really important, and it looks like you all did an exemplary job of making sure that you quickly addressed things that needed to be addressed and then reverse course when you needed to. So thank you so much, Aaron. The other question I have is maybe for Andrea. I'm wondering when you talked about like the particulate matter and how, what I'm concerned about is that in Rockwood, in East County, we have a high concentration of particulate matter already. And I'm just wondering like what lessons you may have learned from the fires and how we can address this maybe in new and better ways.
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging that there are existing issues and unbalanced issues, right? We have people who live near high volume roads, freeways, and large roads that are exposed to higher levels of particulate matter in general. And the Department of Environmental Quality did an analysis of wood smoke from home fires, from wood stoves and outdoor fire pits, and discovered that Latinx populations in our metropolitan region are disproportionately impacted by wood smoke from wood stoves and outdoor ambiance fires. So, you know, I think we need to look at all of the ways that particulate pollution can impact health in the county, and really do our best. The Board of County Commissioners passed an ordinance 2.5 years ago, giving the county the authority to regulate wood smoke from home fires on poor winter air quality days. And I think that's a really great kind of strategy for making sure that on days when we have poor air quality in the county, we have the ability to help people take actions that'll improve the health for everyone.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We don't always get an opportunity to hear from some of your departments, so it's really fascinating to hear what your day-to-day work is like, in addition to when there's an emergency on top of everything. So I just want to really appreciate and thank you all so much for taking such great care of our buildings and our people during this time. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to say I appreciate the work of everyone here at the county who pitched in so many different ways to really respond to the wildfires, for the needs of folks in Clackamas County who had to really evacuate and find a safe place to stay, and also, you know, with the resulting air quality crisis that really had people scrambling, especially, you know, both the folks under the care of Multnomah County, but just for the public in general, getting information out in a timely manner in multiple languages. Just everyone from comms and the EOC and facilities and public health. I just really want to share my appreciation for that. I could ask questions around air quality all day, so I will hold off on doing that. But just wanted to take this time to say how much I appreciated the work and the effort that went in, you know, nonstop during this whole crisis. So thank you.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks for the work that you all have put into this. It is unbelievable the way that you've risen to challenge after challenge after challenge. And it really has been fascinating to hear, as my colleagues have said, about parts of the work that we don't hear very much about. Erin, I really appreciated the detail about the dampers and the filters and, you know, the sheer manual labor that it takes to get these changes made. I think we assume that so many of our processes are automated, and they're really not. It is people who have to go do that work. So great appreciation for that, for the quick response on the call center, really for all of it. So much gratitude. I have one question about our emergency communication systems generally. And, you know, David, I think, and others described that it's multifaceted. We communicate through social media, we communicate through liaisons, and then, of course, there's the public alert system. And I want to start by acknowledging that I was one of the people who could not figure out how to sign up for the public alert system. And I know that at least one of my other colleagues had trouble as well. So I'm curious about that system. I'm curious about, you know, what our evaluation is around how many people actually have signed up for it and use it, and what we can do to make it more effective. Because I think everybody was getting calls throughout the smoke event from people who clearly were not signed up for the public alert system. So curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I also spoke to several people who were trying to get signed up for the system. Chris, do you have any insight on that question or any numbers about where we're at with public alerts?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have the exact numbers of sort of folks that are signed up, but, you know, we actually have a lot of different notification systems, and I don't want to go through all of them in sort of a short time, but just to say this, that the public alert system that people are sort of signing up for, that I think that's important information that sort of people want to know. And we also work with sort of media. If it's a situation where things are more significant, where we have to push information out to you, we also have access to other systems where you don't even need to have someone sign up. And so if you were in Clackamas with the fires, obviously when they were asking people to evacuate, they were using systems that were not opt-in, that they were just creating messages and pushing them out that sort of bounced off sort of cell towers. You didn't get those messages here because we weren't quite in the same situation. So we tried to use systems that were not as intrusive. But I'm happy to sort of get and provide numbers about the public alert system and exactly how many folks we have. But just note that it's one of many systems.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't necessarily need the numbers. I think I'm just raising the question of an evaluation. But if that is supplemented by other systems, then that makes sense. And I think looking at whatever our systems are and the degree to which language is a barrier, for example, or technology is a barrier, and making sure that they're as robust as possible is really what I was getting at. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Moran.
I don't think much more could be said than what my fellow commissioners have already said. I just want to add my deep gratitude to you for all of the work that you did and for coming here today and sharing that with us in such a meaningful way so that we can really get a sense of what things are really like and what that incredible 24/7 work really entails. Just thank you so much.
I want to thank you all as well. Chris Boss, thanks for putting this amazing panel together for us so we can hear directly from folks who spent, as Commissioner Myron said, we're working 24/7 already because of COVID, and then to add this other layer of crisis on top. I know that I spoke with many of you during that time and want to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the work that you're doing. And wanted to allow you this opportunity to be appreciated by the entire County Commission and by the public, because we're so proud of all of the great Multnomah County employees. And now our final briefing is on the COVID-19 response data and trends. And we will start with, I think Rachel Banks, Public Health Director, is going to be kicking this off.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you, Chair Kafoury and commissioners. I just want to first start by also appreciating and thanking all of the presenters that have come before. What amazing work. And, having a job like mine, often you get to talk about the great work that other people have done. And so it's great to hear folks talking about the work that they do every day. Today, I'm Rachel Banks for the record, she, her, hers. I'm your public health director, and I'm joined by Dr. Jennifer Vines. Next slide, please. And we're going to be talking today, as per usual, with a update on where we are with COVID-19 metrics, share with you some information and some testing updates, the progress that's been made with testing, and particularly BIPOC testing. And then also messages for Halloween and Thanksgiving as we enter the colder weather season, and clearly COVID-19 is still with us here through the winter. Next slide, please. So in terms of our overall cases, and this is the epi curve that we often talk so much about. And so what we've really seen is we've closed out September is we've seen a 40% increase in cases that we think were due to Labor Day and just all of the movement around the county that you've heard about before and that we've talked about before. That was ultimately one of the concerns that we had, and we were watching to see what would happen after Labor Day. Of course, this has the caveat that testing was interrupted. And also what we've seen for the latest week that you'll see there is that some of those increases that we saw after Labor Day are decreasing. So that is the direction that we want to see cases going in, and hence why we also want to talk to folks really vigorously about Thanksgiving and indoor holidays as well. And then just another thing that I'll point out. So the orange line on the bottom is for white folks in the county. And then the blue line above is Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And you can see, that we've observed over the course of the pandemic some differences there, and that some of those are that the BIPOC rates are coming down, or they're getting closer together, I should say. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the race and ethnicity of folks who have been tested. The colors go in order of the key. So the pink, or it might show up as somewhat older red on your screen, is white, followed by a gray, unknown, or missing, refused, and then Native Hawaiian, multiracial, and blue. The green is Hispanic or Latinx, followed by yellow, that is Black, red Asian, and blue American Indian or Alaskan Native. So we anticipated seeing some decrease in the amount of folks tested just with testing interrupted in capacity over the course of the smoke and wildfire event. I will say, I know folks have questions about updates for testing. The fabulous Kim Taves is spending some great time with relatives, but for her and the team, they've been working fast and furiously to be working with community-based organizations to get increased testing across the county. So I'm happy to share some updates. There was a Latinx-focused testing event this Saturday with a variety of community-based organizations and legacy health systems. There were 240 people tested at that event, and we helped to provide an on-site coordinator for that. Also, and that was 2 different days. So the 240 folks were in the span of 2 different days. Then we also had a Cully neighborhood testing event, which was postponed because of the smoke and wildfire. Tested 60 people. That was really focused around some particular apartment buildings and complexes where we had seen cases. And that testing was open to whoever lived in those apartments or in the neighborhood. In terms of the Mid-County sites, ERCO has agreed to host the site. The date is to be determined in terms of when starting, but that will be a great partnership, I foresee. Latino Network is confirmed to host ongoing site in Rockwood, and that will start Saturday the 17th. And then be every Saturday between 9:30 and 4. And then we are continuing to look at other options in Northeast and other available sites there. So we're continuing to look there. And so I think with that, the next thing would be to pass it over to Dr. Vines. So I don't know, Chair, if you want me to enter any questions or hand it over to Dr. Vines.
Yeah, why don't we go through some questions on this this piece? Commissioner, we'll start with Commissioner Myron. Commissioner Myron, did you have questions?
Not in this piece, no. Thank you.
Commissioner Jayapal?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel, for this. I would just, I'm so glad that Multnomah County does the race and ethnicity testing individual information. And even though we're prioritizing it, it's just to note like how much is unknown and missing, and how much information like we still aren't getting, even though we're prioritizing it. Because I think we would definitely see the disparities in who's getting tested. I really appreciate the testing that's happened over the last weekend, both in Cully and the Rockwood neighborhoods, to target Latinx communities who are being impacted by this. I'm just curious, like, I know Cully has been identified as a hotspot area. Where are we seeing, currently, where are we seeing some of the other hotspot areas in Multnomah County? And do we have plans to expand access to testing or work with partners to expand access and testing in those areas?
Yeah. So, sorry, just waving to someone who by the office there. So we definitely want where we're seeing hotspots, and particularly around where people live. So there's a way that we can look at the data that just says where folks live. That's how we look at zip code level data, and sometimes that's a function of the actual the exposures and where they live, and sometimes that's a function of exposures somewhere else. And so where we're seeing exposures that seem to be really around where folks live and those, like neighborhood complexes and whatnot, we've really committed as public health to focus there and to really try to move very quickly and offer testing for contacts and symptomatic folks and close contacts and all of that. I can get back to you with an analysis of, the current, what we're seeing in terms of zip code level data. I don't have that off the top of my head, but just to say we are looking at that, and whereby we're hearing, we've done at least 3 actually so far of these sort of very focused testing events that are neighborhood based on where we're seeing cases, and then offering them to folks who live there, their family and friends, and those sorts of connections.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And I know that it's been in the newspaper has reported on it. I honestly haven't seen it, but I think a lot of the national news is like blowing all the local COVID information out of the water. So it's a little harder to find. So that would be great to have. Thank you.
Yeah. And perhaps we can incorporate that to an upcoming briefing as well, with all the caveats in terms of, not wanting to shame people in certain neighborhoods and stuff that I know you all know, but we would say that for the public's benefit.
Thanks, Rachel. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel. I know that you've alluded to this in the past, and on slide 3, where it talks about the number of cases reported, that those lines are coming together of BIPOC community members compared to the white community. But I'm just wondering, and not like we need more charts and graphs, but these are very helpful. But I think it's hard to know like what is our general percentage of populations of those various BIPOC populations, because while it looks very small in this chart, as you well know, it doesn't really reflect that, well, maybe those numbers are actually high compared to the actual general population that we have. So I don't know if there's just kind of a better way to show, because this just kind of lumps it all together. So, but I know that you're very aware of it. So I just didn't know if there's any other way to highlight that.
Yeah, and actually it brings up one of the ways that we look at it on our dashboard, where we actually look at cases and hospitalizations and deaths broken out by specific race or ethnicity, and then compared to what the population size is relative to that. So that's something that folks can see on our dashboard. And once again, we're happy to bring back and do a snapshot of how we look at it in that way as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and that just reminded me, I guess I would say one other thing is that just in regards to Labor Day testing, we look at hospitalizations as an indicator, even if we don't have the testing capacity, but we're still looking at a couple more weeks. We'd like to see a couple more weeks to fully understand what we think the impact of Labor Day was. So we're seeing some now, but we still are going to be looking at it very carefully for the next couple weeks.
All right, Rachel, I think you can go on to the next slide, or is it Dr. Vines coming up?
Fabulous, Dr. Vines.
All right, can I get a quick sound check? Thumbs up? Yes, thumbs up, great. I had the benefit of listening to the question and answer, and I was gonna just share with Commissioner Stegman if I can find it quickly. And I can't, but I think the Latinx community is affected approximately 5 times what we would expect for their population. Same is true, I believe, for Pacific Islanders, and then Black, African American, and others about twice what we would expect compared to their proportion of the population. But since I can't find my exact numbers, don't take my word for it. Go to the dashboard, as Rachel said. If we can have the next slide, please. I'm going to continue with data that will be familiar to you. This is an important one. This is our test percent positivity for the county. We do calculate this a little bit differently from Oregon Health Authority. So if you check their website versus ours, you will see a discrepancy. The basic formula, as you all know, is number of positive tests over the total number of people tested multiplied by 100. And in really rough numbers, if you're below 5%, you're doing well. If you're between 5 and 10%, you need to be paying attention. And if you're over 10%, you're probably headed for trouble. And it was the over 10% test positivities that were being reported out of places like Arizona and Florida as they saw waves of severe COVID pass through. So this metric does assume that reasons for testing are constant over time. So as with all things COVID, we kind of have to wait and see what happens. We are hearing from our health system partners this week that there's a noticeable increase in demand for testing. We're guessing that's because of recent events over the weekend in Washington, D.C. And we're also hearing plans for increased testing capacity. So of course, this metric depends on whether your numerator is full of people who are at high risk and you're finding them, and your denominator, which is how many people can actually access testing who want it to give us a clearer picture of what's happening with COVID in our community. But you can see here, good news, right? We're under the 5% threshold. But again, you also see it kind of bounce around week to week. Next slide, please. These are the school reopening metrics. You see, as you look at the y-axis there, we have to get to less than 30 per 100,000. So this is just flat out number of cases per 100,000 in population. We need to be at less than 30 to get our kindergartners through third graders back. You can see we're over that, but there have been moments of progress. And then the more difficult metric, of course, is the 10 per 100,000, which is what it would take to get K through 12 all back in person. And you see that that's going to be particularly difficult for us to meet in this county. Before I leave this slide, I just want to acknowledge the disappointment and frustration among parents, among educators, and just say we are racking our brains in public health for how to get our kids a good education this year, while also balancing risk of community spread based on the assumption that schools are essentially a potential mass gathering every day where kids can potentially trade germs and, as any parent knows, bring them home to their household and potentially their elders. So again, we take this one really seriously. A lot of work happening here. Next slide, please. I want to speak briefly to phase 2. I should also acknowledge disappointment and frustration for reopening to phase 2. There are a lot of state metrics. The one that we're probably farthest from at this point is the sporadic case rate. So this is the cases that are not linked to known outbreaks or known transmission chains. So this is in some ways a measure of just how dispersed the virus is in the community. We need to be at under 30%, which would signal that we have the virus fairly well contained, meaning that we know where it is and where it's spreading. But unfortunately, we are at about half and half. So half we're able to link to outbreaks and half we're not. This metric, of course, is related to our ability to get a hold of people and to actually interview them to know whether they're linked to a known transmission chain. And there we're at just below the state threshold of 95% phone call within 24 hours. Multnomah County is at 92% as of the second to last week in September. And then our own internal metric is looking at how many we've actually interviewed within 72 hours. And that's less than that. Again, some people don't pick up their phones. Some people decline to cooperate with us. But that is something we look at to figure out if we're having meaningful interactions with the community. Next slide, please. So as you interact with your constituents, you can help us get a few public health messages out. The first one is not on here, but because it goes without saying, which is to get your flu vaccine. October is a great time to get it. There's vaccinefinder.org and 211 for anybody who wants help in finding a way to get the flu vaccine. But we absolutely want to keep as much respiratory illness out of our community heading into the fall and winter months as we possibly can. And we really want people to use all the COVID precautions and the flu vaccine to help keep them out of the hospitals, out of healthcare clinics, and hopefully well as we go through the winter months. Thinking about holidays and people's expectations, you know, everything exists on a spectrum of risk. Centers for Disease Control and Oregon Health Authority, and we agree that trick or treat is probably one of the highest risk activities families can do from a COVID standpoint. That just has to do with just multiple potential face-to-face interactions, shared candy, potentially groups of kids on porches. And so we're actually asking families to reconsider their Halloween plans this year and get creative with virtual events, small outdoor events, remembering that a COVID mask that protects your and your child's nose and mouth is really important, and a Halloween mask may or may not do that. And then just generally, as always, just avoiding events with a lot of people where it's hard to keep your distance. We know several times over now that that's a recipe for spread. I know a lot of people are already thinking ahead to Thanksgiving and their plans. Again, air travel is still considered a high risk activity. And this one, because it's centered around eating, where it's very hard to use a face covering, we're again urging people to get creative around virtual events and just thinking of ways to connect without necessarily being together in person indoors. Finally, we're urging constituents to respect businesses that are taking safety seriously. And so as people potentially look for hay rides or pumpkin patches, really looking for the places that are doing it right with small groups, face coverings, and good attention to distancing. We really want to support the businesses that are listening to our advice and doing everything they can to protect customers and the public. I think with that, if we advance one more, I believe that is all we have for you today. Yeah, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Public Health team. All right, we'll start with questions from commissioners, this time with Commissioner Stikeman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Vines. I wanted to confirm what you had said about the sporadic case rate. Are you, where we're like at 52%, and you mentioned, is that partly due because people are not responding to, the case investigations?
I don't know that I can draw a direct line, Commissioner Stegman. It's a good question, but it's partly a reflection of what's actually happening in the community in terms of spread, and also partly a reflection of our ability to get a hold of people to actually create that link to an outbreak or to known transmission. So I'd say it's a bit of both, but I couldn't tell you in what proportions.
Have we done any PSAs or to talk about the importance of, if you're contacted, to respond?
Yeah, Oregon Health Authority they've done some nice messaging called, answer the call. Any chance I get, especially with culturally specific media, to just reassure people that we don't work with the police, we don't ask about your immigration status, that information is confidential. And, we take the time to train our contact tracers really carefully to build that trust and build it quickly with people. So again, it's an imperfect science. I don't think we're going to get everybody, but we're always working to do this better and to build trust with our communities that are most affected.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Vines, I do have a few questions. First of all, just to follow up to Commissioner Stegman's question around the sporadic case rate, is this something that, like, if we did have more testing widely available, that we may be able to get a better view on some of the known, causes or locations of where cases are originating?
That is a really interesting question. I would have to think about that. On the one hand, more testing could actually identify more sporadic cases. On the other hand, it could help us get a clearer picture of where the transmission chains are and help contain them. I see Rachel Banks has come back on to video. Rachel, did you want to comment?
No, I think, yeah, you raised a couple of good points. I think the part of this I would just underscore is folks' ability to recall who they've been around and to talk to us. So there's a variety of different factors involved. And I think the important thing about more testing that could help us identify more links would be testing of close contacts. And so it would be a focused kinds of testing where we have interviewed somebody and making sure that we're able to get their close contacts tested. And you know, those close contacts, regardless if they had symptoms or not. So those are a couple of thoughts I'd add to the conversation. Great questions.
Yeah, thanks. Great point, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's really good to know. I know, like, and part of that about testing close contacts is like some of the difficulty in getting people to connect with the contact tracing, you know, in the first place. So I was thinking more broadly and widely available testing. And nothing again, I mean, I really appreciate the work that our public health team is doing. I just think that testing in Oregon and even nationwide is just so uneven in terms of who has access to it and what the protocols are, that it's, you know, it's been a national failure of how we've been able to roll this out. And I think it's, you know, it can have impact on even right now what we're experiencing, especially as people are looking towards things like schools reopening, which I would love to have schools reopen as somebody who has 2 kids at home right now, before them. And, you know, and just because it's difficult, and I know it's a challenge for so many families, and that it's having impact, you know, especially disparate impacts on kids who are who don't have access to supports, or parents who have to continue to go to work. It's just really hard. And so I had, and I'm hearing from like parents and constituents who are like, why, you know, we have family on the East Coast who they're going to school, right? Their kids are back in school, and we're seeing that. And I know that like the metrics that were put in place for Oregon of having the you know, 10 per 100,000 cases or 30 per 100,000 cases were, you know, put in intentionally because that's what public health says. But could you just reiterate like why those metrics are important, like why we're using that as a standard? Because I think it's important for folks to know like why they're saying, you know, people in other places being able to go to school and we're not.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and I'll ask Rachel to chime in as well. Those metrics were from the state after looking at countries that had gone ahead of us, and the rationale is that it becomes safe for kids to go to school when there's low enough virus in the community that kids are actually unlikely to trade it around at school and then bring it home. And so that's why you see the really stringent less than 10 per 100,000 for K through 12. And that more stringent criteria is appropriate because there's more and more data showing us that teens essentially get COVID and spread COVID the same way that adults do. Younger children, you see the slightly looser threshold of 30 per 100,000 because young kids are a little bit less likely to get and trade COVID. They certainly can, that's not in dispute. But there's a bit more wiggle room and also a bit more of an important trade-off there in terms of what can be done virtually versus what needs to be done for social development skills. And so I think that's where the state struck the balance. And Rachel, please chime in.
Yeah, no, that's great. I would just add that another thing that I've heard the state talk about is also wanting to get that prevalence low enough so that once schools are reopened, they can stay open. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen in other places across the country where they're opening, but then because of outbreaks and whatnot are closing again or going back to other sorts of learning. So I've heard a lot of that conversation in the Healthy Schools reopening task force that I sit on. The governor leads of folks wanting to, all of the things that Dr. Vine said about the balance and understanding equity, and then also trying to set up some metrics that will allow kids to be back in school safely and to the maximum extent possible stay in school.
Great. Thank you guys both so much for that. And I just also wanted to appreciate you bringing up the Halloween and the holiday guidance. It's definitely not too early to be reminding people of the need to stay diligent and to stay responsible in their behaviors, especially as we're getting into times of year where, we're used to being close and being with family and being and sharing a lot of experiences. So just appreciate that. Thank you guys both so much.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, thank you both so much. This is always such an informative and helpful briefing. I wanted to follow up on a couple of comments and a question of Commissioner Vega-Peterson's. I think I have reiterated sort of ad nauseum the testing piece, and it's certainly been a disaster around the country. And there's more work that the state can do too. And Rachel, I'm optimistic that the state will move on that with some recent news. And I want to follow up on the question about testing close contacts. So the state has recently said that with our getting more rapid testing capability, they're going to expand their guidance to say that we will now, they will recommend testing close contacts even if asymptomatic. Is that happening now in Multnomah County? So as we're doing contact tracing and identifying close contacts, are those folks able to access testing, or is that not necessarily the case?
Thanks, Commissioner Jayapal. I'll take a stab at that, and then I will look to Rachel for more information. I've heard a couple of things. So I hear on the healthcare side that is among their testing criteria. They will do it. Places that appear to be particularly easy to access are places like Legacy Go Health and others. On the flip side, I've also heard from individuals saying, I tried to get tested, and I know you have personal experience with this, Commissioner, I tried to get tested, I wanted to get tested, and it was just, it was a massive questionnaire and a lot of gatekeeping is a word that I've heard recently. So there's a bit of a disconnect there that I don't have a complete handle on. But I think as we speak, the governor is talking about testing in the tens of thousands from the federal government to Oregon and how that's going to be deployed. Let me see what Rachel has to add.
I would just add that for our site, our East County site, that we will test close contacts and have made some modifications there so that we're able to do that.
Yeah, I think we've always done that. So it continues to be the case that in terms of systems at large, it's sort of catch as catch can as to whether people are able to get tested or not. Yeah. And then a question about the thresholds, again, a follow-up to Commissioner Vega-Peterson's question. I appreciated your explanation, Dr. Vines, of those thresholds and the differences based on ages of kids. Do you have a sense of how our thresholds compare to other states? And that might, going to Commissioner Vega-Peterson's point about sort of explaining to people why we're not in a position to open schools and other states are, do you have a sense of how our thresholds compare to other parts of the country?
I know off the top of my head that Washington State is using 25 per 100,000, I think, for all school kids to go back. I haven't looked at other states, but I think this is part of the work we're doing is we should have data, right? So that there schools have opened around the countries in some low prevalence settings and some high prevalence settings. And what can we learn from that? So I think that's where we're really looking for experience to inform what a return to school might look like in our county, given the thresholds are going to be difficult for us to reach.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both so much.
And I do think that we have just locally-ish, the data from Lane County, which the number of positives has gone through the roof as University of Oregon students have returned to school. And I was curious about because in the past we had talked about how you can't, knowing where the positive tests are coming in is only helpful in that where people live, because you don't know where they're working or where they actually got the disease. But apparently, if students are, if they return home and they are convalescing at home, then their count can be counted in their home county as a positive case. But if they are staying at school and quarantine themselves at school, then they can be counted as in their school's county. So I think that is another way that we can see that there has been an uptick in places where they have college campuses and colleges have gone back. And Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. And thank you, as always, Rachel and Dr. Vines. I have one question as well about sporadic case rates. And I was just curious whether those could be, and I know it's hard to determine exactly where, but could that be related in any way to like indoor bars, restaurants being open? I've gone to a couple and just see so much, no one's wearing masks, people are sitting close together. You can't eat or drink while wearing a mask physically. So I was just wondering if there's a potential that there could be a contribution from those to some of the sporadic spread that we are seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Myron. I mean, I certainly can't say for sure that that's what's happening. This question is asked, almost daily to state and local public health. So it's something that we're always watching. I think, to my knowledge, we have yet to trace a transmission chain or cases to a restaurant, at least among patrons. That said, we have seen outbreaks among coworkers who happen to work in the food and beverage industry. So I think we need an answer to this question because everybody's asking it. And I know that the state is looking at it. We are looking at it. The difficulty is the contact tracing focus is downstream. So we try to get some sense of where someone got their infection, but we most urgently want to find their contacts to prevent downstream spread. So our contact tracers are not necessarily asking every last question to find the source of the infection. And that's another balance and trade-off that we're looking at. And yeah. Rachel, feel free to chime in here.
I mean, I think that answered, that's very helpful in answering my question. So thank you. And do we know where the state stands, where we stand as a county in getting hold of some of these more rapid point of care tests? Because that seems like it could be very helpful in tracing some of this.
Thanks. I don't have county level information yet. I don't know if Rachel does. And I know the governor just hosted a press conference on this topic. So we'll be waiting to see what that actually looks like for our county.
That would be great. And also, do we implement the use of pooled testing at all? Like, do we approach our testing that way?
To my knowledge, no one in our region is doing pooled testing. And also, to the best of my knowledge, it's an unfortunately sort of bureaucratic answer around FDA approval to run tests that way. And I don't know, I know there's a lot of interest in it, and I don't know the status of the possibility for pooled testing, but I can certainly find out.
That would be great. I would love to follow up on that because it does seem like an efficient way to test for larger groups of people. And then finally, in terms of the ability to access testing, if you are a person who is Black, Indigenous, another person of color, immigrant or refugee, some of those more, clearly more high risk individuals and people who are affected at a higher rate than the general population. The way I know that things are the way they are written now in the guidelines at the state level and for the Oregon Health Authority make this really discretionary. It's very confusing, make it really discretionary to the individual provider. And it boils down to the person administering the test can make the decision whether or not this person should get the test. And do we have more specific, is there ability to provide more specific recommendations or guidelines for providers in our county or our region?
Yeah, thanks for the chance to talk about this. I think you're spot on as far as sort of the frustration in healthcare of like how to operationalize this very broad guidance that Oregon Health Authority put out, including testing of BIPOC, which was sort of nebulous. I think where we've landed just by consensus and for practical reasons is that the testing criteria are related to symptoms, and that's regardless of severity. So, and it's a long list of symptoms for COVID-19. So very low threshold for testing people with symptoms. And then we've really pushed on testing of contacts, and we've also made that really permissive. You don't, like, nobody has to call public health and, you know, confirm that this person was a contact. I think the way that the BIPOC risk is being interpreted is through these larger testing events that you've heard about this morning, in terms of testing in a network where we're seeing disproportionate health impacts. So that's kind of the state of operations today. But as with all things COVID, that may change.
As with all things COVID, yes. And I do appreciate that. And I hope we get to a point. I mean, we need to get to a point where we can expand the testing capacity. I can't believe we're this far into this pandemic and we have not been able, not we as the county, but we, I would say as a state, because the national it's so obvious failure at the national level. We could do better at the state as well. We really need to increase that testing capacity, including to certain asymptomatic groups. So anyway, I so appreciate all the work that you are doing. And Rachel Vines, hopefully some of that wisdom will be imparted at the state level, where you will have such potential for an impact. And I will just deeply, deeply, deeply miss you here. But that can wait for a later day. Thank you.
Did you just call her Rachel Vines? Was that my imagination?
I don't know. Did I? I could very
Yes,
well have done so in my brain, you know? I could have. I never know what I say.
It's that or Dr. Banks. She gets that a lot too.
She definitely could be Dr. Banks, that's for sure.
I would, so I appreciate, of course, this briefing and you in your teams and all the work you're doing. I think that we can make a solid case to the state that the majority of these new tests that they are able to produce should be focused here in the Tri-County area, as we are the last area of our state that has moved into phase 2. And yet we are the economic engine of the state of Oregon. So the state's recovery isn't going to happen until the Tri-County area recovers, and we can't do that unless we have an increase in testing. So hopefully our new public health director for the state of Oregon will assist us. I know she's going to have to focus more broadly than just the Tri-County area, but knowing all of these facts, that will be helpful. And then just on a personal note, so sad that while we're having this conversation, my 17-year-old is texting me and saying, can I please get a COVID test? I don't feel well. Oh, it's heartbreaking. This COVID thing is just heartbreaking on so many levels. So thank you all for the work you're doing. It's good to see everyone and commissioners. And that is all we have for today. We will be back here Thursday, 9:30. in virtual WebEx land for our regular board meeting. See you all then. Take care, stay safe.